Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending our webinar today, and apologies for having to reschedule from last week if any of you had registered for this session for last week. Although we're talking today about business resilience, specifically related to IT solutions, last week's reschedule was due to more mundane old world reasons that actually two of the presenters, myself and my co-presenter, actually had a real world flu virus. So we had to postpone, which kind of leads me into the discussion, because I thought it was quite interesting when I thought about it, that how we have to continually adapt in this world to change. And just the fact that having this session as a webinar meant that we could literally press a button and send out a reschedule request, as opposed to not so long ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the only way to reliably have a session like this without having to worry about bandwidth issues and technology was to actually have a real live event with people sitting in front of you and the presenters on a stage. And to have to reschedule something like that within minutes for a week's time would have been absolutely impossible. But today we can do it, and the solutions we're talking about today have also changed remarkably in the last few years. And I think you know everyone who's listening has probably already thought about having to adapt and change and make sure that their businesses are sort of solid and bulletproof for today's world, which is very different to a few years ago. And I'll discuss that more as we go along. I'm going to introduce my co-presenter, partner in IronTree, who some of you may know, Stephen Cohen, who was the MD of Sage South Africa, had been with Sage for about 30 years, I think. But I'm going to hand over to Steve, and Steve, you can do your own introduction and carry on with the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, David. And hi, everyone. Thanks for attending. Yeah, the topic today is what is about business resilience. And obviously, that's a very wide concept. And as you know, IronTree plays in the kind of data protection space together with cybersecurity. And I think we're just talking about resilience to IT kind of disasters, whether it be in the form of ransomware, theft of hardware, data corruption, typical viruses. And we're trying to provide peace of mind that your business can be resilient to all of those kind of events, so that you can continue with the most difficult part of business, which is obviously making sales and making sure that your cash flow is consistent. But the difficulty about the space that I used to be in compared to where I am now is one never really applies themselves to the kind of disaster that could occur, because we always think it will never happen to us. And I've seen it with friends of mine who have got divorced and didn't have their affairs in order, all the stuff we're talking about now, where you have a virus or theft. And then all of a sudden, just from nowhere, your life and your business life is put into disarray. And I think that's what IronTree is here to do, is to provide you peace of mind on the compliance, cybersecurity, and obviously the data backup space of your business, which is something that's always overlooked, I feel. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, so just to introduce, I'm going to tell a few stories, and some of you, I'm sure, have got stories of your own, but these are real stories that have come through our call center of people that have had disasters in their business. And there are 4 little stories, sort of different angles or aspects of disaster. The first one, the in-store sales disaster, is a story about a client of ours, a retail client, who had a ransomware attack during one of their biggest in-store sales. And they had about 600 gigabytes of data that got affected by this ransomware attack that was not accessible to them. You can imagine that a retail store in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of a store sale, was a bit of panic. The reseller or the support consultant who dealt with this reseller called us in the middle of the afternoon and told us to please prepare the restore of the data, because they were a client of ours, they were backing up with us. The reseller in this case had authorization to have the client's backup credentials, so it sped up the process. And we started doing the restore as soon as the call came through. But they did have a large amount of data. I mean, 600 gigabytes of data is not large in global terms, but to restore 600 gigs from a server somewhere, in cyberspace does take a while, even if you've got a good broadband connection. And what happened is we actually restored the data. The fastest way to do it was restore it to an external drive at our data center, which, by the way, is in Midrand at the Vodacom Business Data Center. So it's a local data center that would comply with any regulatory compliance issues. And we restored the data to the hard drive, sent it to the reseller, who got it back to the client, who was up and running in 24 hours. Now, I mean, 24 hours for a retail store is a bit of a disaster, but the saving grace was that they did back up their data correctly. They had selected the right data to back up, which is something you need to consider if you are backing up, because data changes all the time. And we were able to get them back up and running within 24 hours because we had the data at a local data center. Just to mention that we do have a more sophisticated solution, disaster recovery as a service, that would have enabled the client to carry on working within probably an hour or two, or maybe even less, depending on the configuration of their system. And that's something we'll delve into in a future webinar, our disaster recovery as a service solution. And furthermore, we also provide a really great ransomware protection solution called Panda Adaptive Defense 360, which would have probably prevented this occurrence in the first place. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So that was really a story about backup, ransomware, security, data recovery, disaster recovery. The next story, which I liked, was named for me by our sales manager in Joburg, who got the story from our call center, and he calls it "Happy Wife, Happy Life," which I really subscribe to. And this is a call we received from a client who was in a panic. He had to back up his laptop. He had put it off for so long, and he signed up for an IronTree backup solution on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. And on his laptop was his business critical data and his wife's accounting data. I think she was some kind of accounting consultant. The backups were set, and because we have a fully managed service, when we institute a backup, we don't actually put the phone down from the client until we see the backup coming through, once we've kind of logged on and helped with the install and the data selection. So he managed to leave the office at about 5, and on his way home, he was pulled over by what looked like a police car, but actually was a car full of bogus police, who actually hijacked him, started his laptop bag with everything in it. And well, obviously he got home a bit late. He was in a bit of a panic, found our after hours number in tears, but we were able to reconnect the backup account to his wife's laptop and restored all the data. So, by I don't know, 9 or 10 o'clock that night, he had all the data back. So the disaster was really averted because of that backup. And once again, because there was someone available on the end of a telephone line to call, and the data was in a local data center, so it wasn't hard to restore it over the internet. The third story, and I know these stories may be taking a bit long, but I think everyone likes stories, and I love telling stories. It was a story about a continuous attack on a company. So this wasn't really a loss of data, but a client who had 50 devices on their network. Some were roving laptops, so they weren't always on the domain, so roving around. And they had the client had called their reseller because they had a problem. They were continuously being attacked by emails and software downloads. They always had viruses and malware on the systems, and they were really subject to an imminent ransomware attack, which I'm sure you've all read about many times in the press, is really damaging and very, very costly. So the conversation really was about malware and virus protection, and I'll talk a little bit more in a future slide about antivirus and why it's not sufficient just to have antivirus. But they needed to ensure they were protected when they were in the office and even when they were working remotely, so they weren't actually on the office domain or network. We instituted the Panda Adaptive Difference 360 solution. It monitors 100% of running applications. I'll talk a little bit more about this later. And it runs as a service. It's hosted in the cloud, so that the protection is continually up to date with a cloud-based intelligent database. And everything is configured and deployed from the cloud, no matter where the user is sitting. So whether working at home, at a coffee shop, at a client in another part of the world, their laptops were essentially protected. And since we did this installation, this client hasn't had a single virus or malware incident. In fact, I'm going to leave the last story till later. So I'm just going to carry on to the next slide. And I'm going to just hand back to Stephen to talk about these critical functions.
Thank you, David. Yeah, the critical functions in your business, I mean, I often find they're such common sense that we don't really consider them properly. So if you just think about your business, obviously all your administrative data is critical, not only in terms of running your business in the right way and making sure that all your administration is in order, but obviously for statutory reasons as well. Your phones, which I found today, most people are going IP-based, your email, and then your critical data. And I think that, you know, IronTree is bringing out some pretty interesting tools where you can see your critical data, you know, what data is critical, because there's so much data today that I think it's kind of driving us all insane. And so if I ask you what data is critical, it would probably take you about 2 hours to sit down and really think about what data is critical. You know, normally we operate in what comes top of mind, you know, your FICA documentation, all your statutory stuff, but there's history and there's all kinds of things that it's so difficult to actually set your mind down to think about what data is critical. And what I do find is that many of our 16,000 accounts that back up with us daily, most of them are actually just backing up their accounting data. And you know, very often when there's a disaster, a lot of our users would say, but only if I was backing up more than just my accounting data. And I think that there's a lot of kind of education needed out there, that IronTree provides much more of a function than just backing up your accounting or your payroll data. And I think I need all of you to consider this properly, that when you set up your IronTree agent, you need to point to what data is the critical data that needs to be backed up. And, you know, as I said, we're going to be bringing out interesting tools around that. Okay, Dave?
Thanks. Just to add to that, I think it's very sort of self-explanatory, those 4 critical functions. If you've got access to those functions, business can carry on. But without any one of them, you're kind of crippled.
David, if I can just add, you know, you mentioned the disaster recovery earlier on. Yeah. I'm assuming that everybody on this call understands disaster recovery. You know, traditionally, are you going to talk about it, Dave?
I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the backup section of the presentation.
Okay,
but you can butt in at any point.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about security, but really what this webinar today is about is just a little taste of what we're going to be covering in more depth in forthcoming webinars. We wanted to really do this as an overview of what is critical in your business, how to build sustainability and resilience, and what the kind of solutions we offer. So I'm not going to go into much detail on the security and the backup and the disaster recovery, but we will discuss it briefly. So in terms of security, a software solution in place. I think you can open any publication today, and most of you will be opening web-based publications, whether it's News24 or Daily Maverick or some kind of IT web or foreign. I use Flipboard a lot on my iPad, and you can open your news source of news on any day, on any time of the day, and you'll see headline stories somewhere in the globe about ransomware or cybersecurity or identity theft. And you know, stuff that really is prevalent, that is crippling major corporations, and that targets every corporation, not just big corporations. So do you have a solution in place? Is it up to date? Is it cloud hosted? So it's auto updated so that you don't have to worry about on a daily basis downloading a new patch or a new virus pattern or something like that, or worrying that someone who's been tasked to do that has actually done it? Are you secure as possible against all cyber threats? So just briefly, antivirus, if you think you've got an antivirus solution and it's sufficient, to me the analogy would be if you're driving like a car you bought in 1990, which has got one airbag and no ABS and none of these safety features that are built into cars today, which was kind of sufficient then because we didn't know any better, and there were like, I don't know, 30% of the cars on the road, and most kind of drivers sort of had an idea of how to obey the rules of the road. Then that was cool. But if you're still driving that car today, or if you've got a child who's about to get a driver's license and you think you're going to give them your old car and buy a new one, would you be happy to give your child a car with no safety features today and let them loose in the kind of anarchic traffic situation that we have around the world at the moment? Well, it's the same with your antivirus. Your antivirus is designed to protect you against known threats. It's designed to protect you against accidents that you can predict are going to happen. So there's a virus pattern that was discovered last week, and your solution's been updated, and it'll protect you against that. But and as I say, we'll delve into this in much more detail in the next webinar. Today, there's approximately 300,000 new strains of viruses being released into the world on every single day, and that's a new strain of virus could be a minor update to an existing strain, but that would not be picked up by an antivirus package. So the proper solution to have today, the proper security, is a solution like our adaptive defense 360 solution, which is monitoring everything that's running on your system and can pick up things which look suspicious or which just don't look like they're behaving in the correct way. And that's the kind of protection you've got to have today. So if you've got a free antivirus that you think is sufficient, or any virus package, even if you've bought it, if it's just antivirus, it's really not sufficient. Are all your devices protected, or just your server? Not much use having your server protected if you've got a laptop and you're working at home at night through your home-based broadband connection. And all your staff educated and trained to be alert, to not click on emails which might look authentic, but a cursory read you'll see spelling mistakes and things which don't look right, or funny attachments that look like they're a funny joke, that people just click on. You have to build in this whole human education element to it. Okay, moving on a little bit to backup. Your security is kind of your perimeter layer. You have to protect the perimeter of your domain. Once you've done that protection, you still need backup. Even if you protect it against malware and ransomware, you can still have disasters. You can have corrupt hard drives. You can have thefts. You can have espionage in your company. There are many ways your data can be compromised that's not related to malware or ransomware. So where is your data backed up? If you're a person that's backing up onto a tape stream or a removable hard drive, or even worse, a USB drive, that's probably the most insecure methodology, a USB drive. The data is not encrypted, it's not protected, it's not secure. People can take that USB drive off your desk and go plug it into their computer and read your data. It's easily corruptible. It's not an enduring hard-wearing device. Likewise, removable hard drives. Typically, we find those removable hard drives are plugged into a server and left there to gather dust, and are never tested, and are easily corruptible as well. And old-style solutions like tape streamers are expensive, unreliable, incompatible, and just really not sufficient for proper backup routines. Is your data accessible? We have a situation today, the race to zero cost. So where can I find a solution where I can back up, which costs me absolutely nothing? Well, do you know where that server is, that free service? Is it sitting in a server in someone's garage, where their guards, their security consists of the Rottweiler at the door? Is it even worse, a server in the Black Sea, which is actually on the yacht of the renowned Russian who spreads ransomware. Is it accessible? When you need that data, how easily can you get it back? Can you call somebody and get them to help you to restore that data? And when you have the data, how far back can you go? Can you get back a copy of the data before you got hit by malware or ransomware? That could be a week ago, it could be 10 days ago, and likely you might just need 2 days ago. You might realize you deleted a file by mistake last week and you actually need it back. So how far does your backup let you restore that data to? So these are things that you've got to consider when you talk about backup. If you're looking for more than backup, and this is what Stephen was alluding to in the previous slide, if you want a situation where you need to be up and running within minutes or hours with your entire system. So remember, if you're just backing up your data, if you have a disaster, you would need to get a new machine and configure it and put on the operating system. Potentially that's a server. It might take a week to get from your supplier. Your service provider will take another 2 days to configure it. You could be out of business for days. If your business needs resilience that demands that you're up and running within hours, you need to look at a proper disaster recovery solution. And these are typically solutions that have only been available to major corporates who prepare to spend hundreds of thousands of rand a month until recently. But now, with the broadband connectivity and cloud-based solutions, what we can offer and what IronTree do offer is disaster recovery as a service, where we kind of extend your backup to back up an image of your entire server or your entire network, whatever it is you prefer. And if you have a disaster, we restore that image to a virtual server, which is kind of an image of your server in our data centers in the cloud. We give you a log on, and you can be up and running within sort of hours, literally, depending on how much data you've got. Between an hour and 3 hours, we can have your business operating as if nothing happened. Even if your building burnt down, you could be doing this from your dining room table, and until you recover, and then we restore back to your local solution. Steve, is that the kind of stuff you wanted me to cover with disaster recovery?
Yeah, David, I mean, I just wanted to accentuate the point how the industry has moved. You know, when I was younger, it was all just about backing up your data. But I think that because of the tools available now and the speed of the internet, that your software and your data is backed up. So because of the frenetic pace that business operates on, you know, it was always cool to say, okay, we'll take 3 days to reconstitute the server and then we'll put the data back on. So I think it's such a paradigm shift now that, in fact, your applications and software and operating system plus your data is now backed up, and that is what's called disaster recovery. So if it's you need to, you know, look at your business and decide, you know, could you be taken out for a day while people are busy reloading software and then the data, or would you prefer it to be able to be like online within an hour and your business is up and running, and then you get your hardware at your office and you slowly reconstitute stuff while you really running your business from our server at Vodacom? It was just quite a mind shift for me, David.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I think, do you want to just carry on with the action plan slide, Steve?
So, you know, what I also think we take for granted, and unfortunately we only get hit in the face when it happens, is, you know, what do you need to do when a disaster does occur? Whether it's your telephone system going down, who do you phone? Whether it's a server being stolen or even your website going down, you know, what events need to be triggered to get everything up and running? And, you know, even how do you communicate with your customer base and people who rely on the business? So we've developed a product called Plan for Continuity that we're just fleshing out, which allows you to actually put in all your critical, let's say, processes and what would happen, who needs to be contacted, what information needs to be sent out, and you can just trigger this whole thing, and it sends out emails, sends out SMSs, WhatsApps, based on the decision tree that you've set up if something goes wrong. Because also what happens in a business is, let's say you have an IT person who deals with your telephone provider. Now, when something happens and your IT employee is not around, all of a sudden you don't know who to contact. You don't know what to do. Even going so far as how do you notify your insurance company of, let's say, a truck of yours was stolen? you can set up all these kind of processes in decision trees, and stuff automatically gets triggered for you to the relevant personnel. And it even happens to me at home. The other day, my wife's car was stolen, and where's the original papers? Who's the insurance broker? What's our policy number? I could have just triggered all of that off by hitting one button. And I think it's going to be a fantastic product that just kind of jigsaw puzzle so nicely into what IronTree does in terms of business continuity, business as usual. And I really encourage all of you to just keep your eye out for when that product will be released in a few months' time.
Thanks, Steve. And I just want to emphasize what Stephen said about planning. And really, I think it's the old cliche, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And a disaster, as we said on the slide, is a disruptive event. But the more you've planned to mitigate the effects of a disruptive event, the smaller the disaster is. And probably not many of us are good at planning in business because we're busy doing business. But if you've got a plan, that a tool that you can plan with, which, as Stephen said, we'll be releasing. I mean, it actually has been available for a while. We haven't publicized it because we still need to clean up a bit of the functionality, and I think, as Stephen said, that will be in a month or two time. But if you have a plan that you know is based in the cloud, that's accessible, and I think that's important as well. It's not just a file in your drawer or in your strong room, which you give to the auditor every year to tick off a box on your audit report. It's something that's a dynamic solution that gives you access to documentation which you've stored linked to that plan. And I think that's going to be quite exciting. Just before I move on, for those of you who do deal with our content, yeah.
Can I just add something? I mean, it may sound trivial, but because what we're talking about is really incidents that happen maybe once a year, businesses are always just worried about sales, and as they should be, and customers and their employees. But another great thing about this tool is that it forces you to sit down and think and actually draw out the processes. Because if you had to ask me, David, I think it would be very difficult for me to actually come up with a plan. But once you provided me with a tool that makes me think and actually draw it out and who should be contacted, in itself, it helps you uncover stuff that maybe wouldn't be top of mind.
100%. Very well said, Steve. Just before I move on, for those of you who do deal with IronTree and have spoken to guys in our call center, the picture on the bottom left is actually some of us. That's part of our Joburg team. So on the flanks, on the far right, is Paul, our partner, and one of our technical director who manages our servers in the Vodacom data center. On the far left, Trent, the muscle man who's works with Paul and makes sure that all the servers are continuously in a state of fully operational. To Trent's right, Shannon, and to his right, Elzan, two of our account managers in Joburg. On Paul's, as we're looking at on Paul's, to the left of Paul, or on Paul's right, is Byron in Joburg, and the last person in the middle is me, right? Okay, so I'm going to move on. Okay, so this really was a presentation about building sustainability in your IT solutions, I think, but I'm going to hand back to Steve now, because I think, let's not worry, let's not think that you don't have to think about other, as we've called it, nitty-gritty details, which I'm sure you all have, but I think, and Stephen, I'm sure will cover this, the world has also kind of progressed and based on the threats that we see in cyberspace, as well as not only the threats, the issues that we have with spam calls and emails and just interruptions. Legislation has changed, and these are things you have to think about as well. So, Steve, I think you're probably more qualified than I am to speak about this slide.
What, because I'm a chartered accountant, Dave?
Well, not only that, Steve, because you've kind of managed a global business.
You know what, David? For me, once again, this is the boring stuff that catches you out. And, just where we started Softline Pastel originally in 1990, how the world has changed since then. I mean, bookkeeping never changed. Debits and credits still remained relevant. And obviously the software improved. But what has changed massively is the legislative environment. And any of you who have bank accounts out of the country where you know your clients are paying dollars into, to actually access that stuff is almost impossible. It's like your money isn't even yours today. The KYC, know your client provisions. I mean, I had money in an Australian bank account that I wanted to transfer. The people spoke to me. It was like they were doing me a favor by talking to me, and I couldn't remember my mother's maiden name, and they actually ended up saying, we can't verify you, and put the phone down. So when you put all of that together with GDPR, which is the General Data Protection regulations in the UK, or in fact the whole of the EU, America's now doing it. And there's an act called POPI, that's protection of personal information, which is going to be promulgated in this country probably within the next year. It's because there's been so much corruption in the world, and because the internet, while making life so much more convenient for us, has also opened us up to far more risks, and you're having imposters and a hell of a lot more fraud ever happening than it used to. And because you can have 10 billion names stored on a hard drive, and if it's hacked, and all of a sudden all that information is out there, the world's really clamping down. And I'm sure a lot of you have read about the Facebook incidents, the British Airways incidents, the Sony hack. You know, before that couldn't happen. You would have to probably have a warehouse full of paper that you would then ship to someone, let's say in Russia, and say, yeah, all the names. Now you just send it, you put it on Dropbox or something, and they've got it. So all these regulations are really overwhelming, I would call it. I do think that the intentions are good. I think that sometimes, though, you get technocrats who actually draft the legislation and don't really think about small business or business at all, who have to spend so much money on what we call compliance. And we're developing tools as IronTree that will help you kind of aggregate all the stuff in one place and have all, as I said, these decision trees and answer questions, because and let the product flesh out what you need to comply with as a business. Because once again, the costs are enormous if you want to just go to your accountants and your lawyers and get it done, and really small business can't afford it. And secondly, where do you start? So I think that, you know, using our software, our POPI software, which will be out, I think, in about a month. Our GDPR, we've already got a few hundred clients using it in the UK. It's really going to help you to say, let me start at A, and then you answer questions, and the software just fleshes out the decision trees for you, what documents need to be stored, what internal staff training you do. So if you aren't compliant with something, then at least you can say to the regulator, I did everything I could. There it is. It's on a server at Vodacom, my whole kind of POPI compliance, my GDPR compliance. There's all my sureties. There's all my documentation. And at least people can see that you made an effort. But it's becoming a very difficult world in terms of regulation. And everybody knows it's hard enough to just run your business in the first place. So, you know, the software that we're developing is going to just help you go all through all these things. At least you haven't missed anything. You know, you can make a decision. That last point 5, insurance. Are you properly insured? Are your premiums up to date? These are very tiny things that even me at home, you know, I changed my whole sound system the other day. I probably doubled the value. I didn't tell the insurance company. And if something happens, you know, I'm going to lose out. So I think that, you know, really going through all the stuff where it forces you to think about things is going to be enormously helpful to yourselves.
Thanks, Steve. Okay. So I think this is the second last slide. Just an ideal disaster plan. And I don't really think we need to talk too much about this slide because it's quite self-explanatory, but the left is kind of a real world situation that we see. I mean, funnily enough, or maybe it's not so funny, it's predictable. The highest volume of calls we get in our call center that's related to recovery of data as a result of theft is on a Monday morning, because what happened during the weekend, the office was unattended and people broke in and stole laptops and servers and stuff. That happens to us every Monday. In fact, to go back to my last story, which I didn't tell earlier, this was a story which happened on a Friday afternoon. One of our clients was a small trader, had shut their office on a Friday afternoon and gone away for the weekend. and well, they'd actually just gone away for the afternoon in this case. And whilst they were away from the office, their office was robbed, and they actually got back late Friday afternoon, and there was nothing in their office. They needed to open on Saturday morning. They called our call center. We managed to restore their data late on the Friday evening, and we actually put the data onto a removable hard drive. They didn't have a good enough bandwidth connection at their shop, and we got the data back to them on a Saturday morning early, and they were back up and running during the Saturday morning. They were back ready for business, and certainly by the Monday morning they'd fully recovered. So you know, you need to think about what is going to happen if you arrive at your office and your equipment's been stolen. I mean, that's just one of the kind of disasters, but if that happened, wouldn't it be nice if? And I mean, I could just read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I think that's the situation which we strive to recreate in a real world environment, and I think we do that quite well. I think stats, we've been in business for 10 years, we get about 16,000 backups a day, of which about 12,000 are unique clients, because some of our clients have got more than one system backing up to us. And the stats over the 10 years have been pretty consistent, that roughly 20% of our customers will experience some form of data loss or corruption at least once a year. So that's 1 in 5 people, and that's not even discussing malware and cyber security. So it's probably much more prevalent than 20% if you add all those factors in. You want to add anything on that slide, Steve?
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so really, as I said in the beginning, this was just a short seminar to give you an overview of what we're going to be presenting in future webinars. I'm not sure when the next one is. Jaco will be sending out the invitation in the next few days, as well as a follow-up to this one with the recording, if you'd like to watch it, or even better, pass it on to someone else that you know you think may be interested. And I'm not sure if you'll include a survey to just let you rate what you felt of this webinar and whether there's any value in it for you. So we look forward to your feedback. But if you want to post any questions, we're able to answer them right now.
Dave, if I can just add that I think that, you know, this was a very superficial umbrella bird's eye view look at everything. I think that the importance is going to come when we go into the detail.
Yes, totally. Thanks, Steve. I think Jaco's the moderator, so I'm not sure. I don't see.
Hi, guys. So, Dave, we've got one question from our audience this far. Maybe you or Steve can maybe just address it. So Josephine asked, how affordable is this for a startup business? So I'm assuming she's referring to maybe disaster recovery as a service. So maybe just talk to that.
Yeah, okay, so disaster recovery as a service, as I said, is really an extension of our backup. Just to rehash that a little bit, where we back up not only your business data, but we back up the entire image of your server. So that's your operating system, the applications installed. It is more expensive than backup. So I think you're pitching this at someone who's willing to spend, I'd say, probably 2,000 to 3,000 Rand a month. So it's sort of for a medium to large enterprise, I guess, or even a small high value business where the continuity is critical, that they cannot actually be out of action for more than an hour, 2 or 3 hours. So I think probably looking at sort of 2,000 Rand up per month for a robust solution like that.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Josephine. I hope that is what you were asking about. If there's any other questions you have, then by all means, just type it in the chat box. Dave, let's maybe give another 2 to 3 minutes for any other questions, and then we can wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Jaco. Thanks, Steve.
Dave, did you cover the cost of the cybersecurity stuff, the 8360?
No, I didn't. I can add that in. So that's the sort of more than antivirus. That's the solution that monitors everything on your system and will prevent ransomware attacks based on detecting behavior that's not normal, as well as in looking at a global intelligence database of known malware. So it picks up known malware, which is updated on a minute-by-minute basis, as well as stuff which hasn't been classified as malware but just looks suspicious, and it will put it into quarantine and stop it running until you either say, well, that's actually not good, or I do use that application, so let it run. And there you're looking at roughly 65 Rand per device per month. So just multiply that by the number of devices that you have. And that includes, as I said, roving devices, which are not always hooked to the office network. And when you're calculating that, I think it's important to also think of the cost of being hit by a ransomware attack. And we've seen guys that have been not only asked to pay hundreds of dollars ransomware, it's worse than just paying the $300 or $400, $500. It's the mission of actually paying it in Bitcoin. So you'd have to actually get authorization from your bank and open a Bitcoin account, and it's a real mission. It almost becomes sometimes an unmanageable solution. And the cost of actually not having your data and not being able to work for that period of time between you get infected and you're able to recover, even if you do pay the ransom, you have to compare that to what is the cost of a 65 Rand per month on 10 devices. And I think, to go back to what Stephen said earlier, some of these solutions are modern day solutions which you actually have to think about, which actually is just a business cost. A lot of things in business have become cheaper because of the internet. I mean, I don't know what you guys do. It would be interesting to know if you use voice over IP telephony, but we switched to voice over IP in IronTree about 7 years ago, and our business has grown in 7 years probably 4 times. So the volume of calls that we make is 4 times higher, and yet our voice over IP bill is lower than our telecom bill was 7 years ago when we were a fourth of the size. So there are a lot of ways you've saved costs today, but there are some costs which have actually become costs which didn't exist in the past. And that's, what I said in the beginning, adapting to change and making sure you've got the right solutions. Yako, is that a good enough answer?
Very comprehensive as always. Yeah, I think we've addressed all questions. So if there's nothing else, then that's a wrap from my side.
Yeah, well, thanks for attending, and I hope that you'll attend our next webinar, and I hope if you like this one, you'll tell some other people or your colleagues to attend as well. Thank you, Steve.
Cool, guys. Cheers.